reporting for ABC News 24.
Don't think about that. Put it out.
Hello, welcome to The Drum. I'm Julia Baird. Coming up, the Prime Minister vows to fight the states to deliver her education reforms. Business unhappy with Labor's crackdown on temporary visas, and why treating Aboriginal students differently isn't working. We'll talk to Professor Marcia Langton. Our panel tonight, economist and contributing editor for The Australian, Judith Sloan, New South Wales Greens MP Cate Fairman, and Joe Hildebrand from the Daily Telegraph. And you can join us on Twitter using the hashtag #TheDrum. Well, the federal government is facing another stoush with the states, this time over school funding. Victoria announced over the weekend it would go it alone on education reform, saying it could deliver better outcomes than the Commonwealth. The Prime Minister has vowed to fight the states if they resist her plan for change. Now, Judith, what do we make of this movement by the states? Do you think this is an appropriate response to the current stoush between, the federal and the state governments?
Well, I think it was inevitable. Mind you, the Victorian government, when it says it's going alone, it's a bit like my children going it alone, financially speaking. Yes, we've got our own plan. Our plan's going to cost $400 million. Your plan's going to cost $1 billion. But could you give us the $400 million because you're saving $600 million by going with our plan?
Right.
So, look, I think it's just completely politics at the moment. But the issue, I think, is that the politics are not favouring Julia Gillard because, I thought one of the best quotes over the weekend was the West Australian Premier who said, well, we own the schools. She really doesn't have much leverage on this, and I'm kind of predicting the best outcome for her is what I'd call Gonski light. So it's going to be like a sort of pale version of the report, and she will grab it and it'll all be about achieving excellence in all the schools and blah-de-blah. But really, at this point in time, the states, I think, are going to play really hardball. And so what she's going to be able to, I think, salvage from it is going to be pretty meagre.
Right, what do you think, Kate? I mean, this is an extremely fractious environment. It's very difficult to get anything done.
Yeah, and it's just such a pity that it's come to an election year that we're now debating this and talking about this. Like, Julia Gillard was the Education Minister back in 2007 when she came in, to become Prime Minister as well. She had education at the front of her agenda. So now we're in an election year. We know we've got to see legislation very, very soon to suddenly be talking about this for the states as well. The states aren't obviously playing nicely on this. They're making it political. They can sniff an Abbott victory and I think are trying to hold out. So it's incredibly disappointing. We know that we need action. Gonski was the first big review into school funding at the federal level in 40 years. It's incredibly important. The Greens support all of the initiatives in it. But to see it now politicised to the point that firstly, we're not getting much funding for it because the mining tax isn't bringing anything in really in terms of the budget. And then to politicise it by the states, it's appalling it's happening now in this election year. We've got to get it through. The Greens will commit to getting it through, but we're also suggesting an amendment, which we hope the government will support, which would see the most disadvantaged schools getting the first round of support if we can't get the $5 billion or whatever it is, $6.5 billion I think it is, that we now need to ensure that Gonski is delivered. So the Greens will support it, but it's not looking like the entire. You talked about Gonski Light, Judith. Perhaps Gonski Light is ensuring that the most disadvantaged schools do get support first up.
That's right. Gonski Light is like what you are when you're not quite fully Gonski.
Yeah.
Sadly, I think it might be a bit late for
What do you think, Joe? I mean,
she has to deliver full Gonski, otherwise her credibility is shot again. I mean, you can't have another, after the carbon tax, after the budget surplus, you can't have another thing where she gets up and says, right, this is my centrepiece, this is my platform.
This is different because it's shared with the state, so there's always going to be some pushback on the part of the state.
She has said that she would implement the full range of reforms. The buck stops with her. And look, don't get me wrong, I don't envy her. I mean, the states are obviously being absolute aunts about it, they're terrible. But, the point is, she got up and said, that she would deliver it all. She actually added an extra bit of funding on top of that for kids with learning difficulties and disabilities, which I thought was excellent and very good and very brave. And yet, all of a sudden, she can't do it. It's a bit like it's a bit like getting on the phone to the president of East Timor and saying, "Yeah, no problem," and then all of a sudden, it falls apart. She has got.
When she should have been speaking to the Prime Minister too.
That's right. She actually called the wrong guy. She has got to stop either making these promises and then thinking that she can just sort of backpedal out of them, or she's got to just stick all the way through and play hardball and learn how to sell the message, which the government is doing so poorly at. I mean, Ted Baillieu has got to be the least popular Liberal Premier, Liberal government leader in the country. I mean, he's, strangely enough, in a rare act of symmetry, he's managed to do the same thing with Julia has done, which is come in and in less than one term make himself so unpopular that everyone wants to go back to the people they just kicked out. Right. And part of that was because of the appallingly Labor-run state campaign the last time round. But whatever, if she can't pick a fight with this guy, if she can't pick off the runt of the litter, if you like, and really, go in hard and knock him off and make an example of him and stick him on a spike outside Parliament House and say, right, this is what I did the first one, the rest of you all play ball. I mean, the Western Australia Premier wants to say he owns the schools. The government's got the money. The federal government has the money. Okay. Like, you want to play hardball? Here's no money. You can have your schools, which they stupidly did actually build for them, so they're still nice and shiny and new. Right. The ultimate joker is up their sleeve, so play.
But irrespective of who you think the runt is, I mean, in April she's got to deal with the entire litter, right? The COAG meeting is going to be absolutely crucial. She's already fighting about health funding. There's Gonski, NDIS. Has famed skill as a negotiator, but who could bring peace to a meeting like that or have a satisfying outcome?
Well, because I think there's another really important angle to this, is that, okay, it's sort of like the dream of the central plan and we're going to fix it all and, we're having every school in Australia. The state governments are principally responsible for their own public schools, right? But the federal government is principally responsible for the funding they provide to the non-government schools. And that's a really big issue because they've had to kind of roll over the arrangement. There was supposed to be a new agreement with them in 2013. They then wanted to make it into the big thing, the big show with Gonski. So that's just been rolled over. We'll now get to the point that they have to come to some sort of position with the non-government schools for 2014, or else they'll have to roll it over again. Now, they can be absolutely vicious political opponents if they think they're going to lose out, and there's not enough explanation of the modelling, of the funding. So the non-government schools, I know the non-government schools are very worried about a very Orwellian phrase, have to submit a school improvement plan each year. They're worried about the red tape, they're worried about the uncertainty of funding. So that, I think, is an important political dimension.
But this is an opportunity for everybody to be working together. It's a significant review, and it just...
I didn't think it made any sense, the review, actually. And when people say, do you give a Gonski, what does that actually mean? It means tossing more money at everything, when we've tossed more money at everything anyhow, and yet the performance has gone backwards. It's really...
Well, the money is actually coming away from schools. I mean, in the New South Wales, for example, $1.7 billion cuts announced by the federal government. Not all of that is schools, I take it. A lot of it is TAFE. But still, we've seen public education go down and down in terms of standards in relation to OECD levels.
We've had a 40% real increase per student funding over the past decade. 40%.
Why then are our literacy rates and our learning rates going down?
There's a combination of issues. I mean, I think none of us, I think we're all too, cynical to be able to feign surprise at politicians playing politics. It's like sacre bleu. In terms of the real politics of it, you only really need everyone to get along when you're losing. If you've got the upper hand, you don't need people to cooperate with you. You just go in there swinging. So that's the fact of the matter. Liberal states are going to arc up against federal Labor governments. I mean, if that didn't happen, you'd have to go and check the water at every Parliament House in the country. But in terms of the Gonski thing, yet again, the government has done an appalling job of selling what should be an excellent policy. And it's the same thing when it failed to tell the story of the economy and explain what a great idea, how well it had managed aspects of the economy, because it knifed the guy who was Prime Minister at the time, so it was a bit awkward. And also they failed to be able to talk about, possibly having a nation-building budget instead of having to run a surplus at all costs. Instead, they got hoisted by their own petard by saying we need a surplus at all costs, and then saying no, actually we're not going to have a surplus and it doesn't matter. So, you know, it's crazy. This is just another example of that. They cannot explain to people why even their good policies are good for them. Some people come to that kind of conclusion on their own by looking at the Gonski Review independently. But again, you get to the same problem. Like we had Christine Milne getting up last week and just basically, you know, dropping an A-bomb on the government for not delivering absolutely everything the Greens wanted. I mean, imagine if she now tries to get up and say Gonski light. You know, not only is her credibility going to be shredded in terms of the promise that she was going to do that, but if she doesn't do, if she doesn't go all the way, then she's going to be attacked by the teachers' union, she's going to be attacked by the Greens, she's going to be attacked by elements of the left, and if she does go all the way, she's got to find $6.5 billion. Where on earth is she going to get the money from?
The mining tax.
The big
well, the irony is, it doesn't matter because she's not going to be in power after September anyway, and the coalition government,
And
the
they're
Greens
not
help
going
get
to change
elected,
the mining
is
tax.
going to just shred the lot.
Okay, well, and another headache for Julia Gillard. The Labor leadership speculation continues, fuelled by another poll suggesting Kevin Rudd could save seats for the party in Queensland. At the start of a sitting week for the Senate only, opposition frontbench Barnaby Joyce called on the member for Griffith to stop playing games and challenge Julia Gillard.
Now, what I don't like about what Mr Rudd's doing is it's self-indulgent. If he's fair dinkum, then he should have the ticket to stand up and say, this is ridiculous, we've got to try and get this show back under control. And if he's not doing that, if it's just some sort of fit of pique where he's sort of sulkily going around trying to throw mud on everybody, then he's less of a person than I thought he initially was.
Independent Senator Nick Xenophon looked to Hollywood for inspiration on the leadership question.
The Oscars are on tonight, and I just thought, you know, what movies best reflect the current situation in Canberra? And to me, it's a combination of Argo, that hostage thriller, and Zero Dark 30. I think the Australian public is being tortured by what's going on. With every opinion poll, it just seems to be a bit more torture for us. Unlike Zero Dark 30 or Argo, we've got no idea how it's going to end.
Kate, do you want to have a guess at how it might end?
I must admit, Nick Xenophon kind of deserves an Oscar, I think, for the most corniest grabs. I mean, he is really king of the corny grab, isn't it? He definitely knows how to get the media bite at the end of the day. I don't know how it's going to end. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy, I think we're seeing. You know, we've got the speculation around Kevin Rudd, the media feeding on the speculation, people within Labor getting nervous about things, the public seeing potential speculation in the media and therefore potentially changing their vote a little bit when they're being polled. I mean, this is kind of what, you know, Kevin Rudd knows in some ways how to cause instability within the party, and I think it looks like there are definitely people within the party who are doing that. Obviously, it's a federal election year, and it's time to come behind Julia Gillard for the good of Labor. I mean, that's all I can say, really.
Why don't the Greens come behind her then?
What do you mean
why
by
don't you
we
guys
can
help
come
her out?
behind?
We cut her loose at her lowest moment. We talk about Zero Dark 30. That exactly describes Labor's prime vote.
Well, we weren't talking about the leader.
Did the Greens come to Gillard's defence after they signed?
The leader, whether it was Julia Gillard or
you signed
Kevin
the agreement
Rudd.
just with Julia Gillard. You were very particular about that. And when she was at her lowest point, in her darkest hour, in her very Zero Dark 30, to quote Nick Xenophon, what did the Greens do? Did they give her a helping hand? No, they put a bolt gun to her head.
This was about the Labor Party last week, nothing about leadership.
Back to the polling. Judith, 14%, I think the Galaxy poll said that would improve their chances in Queensland if Kevin Rudd took the leadership. Is that enough?
Well, yes, but I mean, of course, I think there are a lot of, you know, teasers out there, aren't there? Those sort of hypothetical polls one has to treat, I think, quite with a degree of cynicism. But look, you know, I mean, I think it's actually, I mean, look, they've made a rod for their own back, really, because I think part of the trouble is that there is every journalist out there absolutely terrified that they might miss the story, like they all missed the story last time. So even if there isn't a story, they're looking for the story. So, you know, and then, of course, you know, from time to time, some, you know, member of the caucus gets a bit pissed off and talks to them and stuff. So that's then...
You think that's from time to time?
Yeah. Quite
constant rumbling.
So, but you know, again, my children probably get very annoyed, but you know, one of my daughters put me onto revenge, right? I reckon this is, you know, the theme for Kevin Rudd. Like, up to a point, he's playing with their minds. It's revenge. I mean, I don't understand the importance of going on Channel 7 early morning news programs, but this is really important.
Very nice people. I have good coffee.
Yeah, it's good. Yeah.
But Joe, if
You know, I think if he were really going to be more diplomatic and more helpful, he wouldn't have done that. You know, there's obviously a big message in that.
Are you suggesting, Judith, that perhaps Kevin is up to no good? How could you?
Completely
Look at his
up to no
sweet
good,
little face.
actually, yeah.
Of course
and I'm not sure he really cares whether he's the leader or not.
No, I don't think he really does. Well,
isn't that?
Yeah, again, I don't know. Like, you can't. There's a saying that I read in an old comedy book called from the people who did Not in the 9 o'clock news on the BBC years ago, and forgive any horrible imagery that comes from it, but it says, "He who kills a man's son, rapes his wife and buries his daughter alive in an anthill should not expect to sit at that man's table without the subject coming up." And this is, and again, we come down to a fundamental point of an absolute egregious, like fatal, terminal lack of judgment within the Labor Party. These people, not only did they knife a first-term PM in the cruelest and most sudden of circumstances and expect that there would be no blowback from it, but they knifed him because he had been identified as a vindictive, cruel, narcissistic man who just hated that stuff and wanted power at all costs, and still thought they could knife him and that he was just going to cop it sweet and walk away. I mean, what were they thinking?
The question's been asked a fair bit, hasn't it?
But if you were a member of the ALP cabinet, you're equivocating. You're like, oh, previously supported Gillard, maybe I should move to Rudd, look at these polls. But meanwhile, all these members of the coalition are saying Rudd should stand and Rudd should challenge. Wouldn't that make you a little bit nervous?
No. Sorry, I know I'm interrupting. I didn't mean that.
We
should be very. Anytime Kevin's mentioned, a little switch goes off that starts me waving my arms. Have to be very careful. What the coalition is doing is not trying to get Kevin to run and win. What they are trying to do is rush Kevin into a leadership challenge and taunt him for not doing it quickly because they know he doesn't have the numbers yet. What they want him to do is challenge and lose. The coalition's worst nightmare is that eventually Kevin does get the numbers and ends. They want to sort of maintain the Labor Party sort of, you know, this stasis of instability, if you like, if you can handle that contradiction in terms, where Gillard's still the leader but constantly being antagonised by Rudd. So that's why they're trying to goad him into, you know, think of it like an ambush where you got, you know, a bunch of hicks around the corner and you're trying to get the kid, you know.
But I mean, the bottom line is that it just works so much against the government trying to get on and govern, doesn't it, really?
Well,
it's so unbelievably...
It's so distracting.
It's so distracting. But mind you, you know, she's good on the own goals, you know, for a girl particularly. You know, because really I think calling the election early was just ridiculous because, you know, she might say it's not a campaign, but it is a campaign. And so she's trying to campaign and govern at the same time. So it's not really a good idea.
Right, and let's get back to that campaign because there's more bad news for Labor in the opinion poll of New South Wales. The news poll conducted for The Australian in that state shows the coalition leads the ALP 60-40 on a two-party preferred basis, and Labor's primary vote is down to 27%, the lowest point for 6 months. Voters were surveyed over January and February after the New South Wales corruption inquiry began hearings into the conduct of 3 former ministers. Cate? It's very difficult to pass this out, I know. How much of this is due to what's happened at ICAC? Or are there any broader questions at play here?
Well, what's happened at ICAC is symbolic of what was happening with Labor over the last however many years while they were in government. We saw that at the last state election. Of course, ICAC is just, you know, putting the kind of airing so much of it. You know, it's just unbelievable, in fact, the level of corruption really within, you know, it's all before then. It hasn't been found yet, but given everything we're hearing, it's alleged corruption. Given what we're, you know, it's extraordinary. And what we do know, of course, is that Labor seem to be operating a bit of a fiefdom with these ministers who were pretty much running the state as though it was their own little club and they could do anything with it. And that people are seeing this just absolutely appalled. Do you think they were pretty angry at the last state election? Now they've just seen all this stuff through ICAC, you know, the ordinary people who are watching ICAC proceedings every day. You know, it's absolutely disgusting. And the faith that people had in, I suppose, all politicians really, I don't think it's good for politics generally, but for the Labor Party, it's, you know, it's almost fatal. You know, it's pretty bad.
What do you think, Judith?
Well, the thing is, you know, like I'm a Victorian, and so we don't know who all these nice types are, the Obeeds and the McDonalds and the like. But yeah, and possibly, thank God, we don't. But you know, it's like trashing the brand, really, isn't it? You know that because it's interesting because really the scope for corrupt behaviour is much, much greater at the state government level than it is at the federal level because they're involved in, you know, particularly planning. But also involved in various businesses and the like. And so, yeah, it was, you know, it was quite a little group up here, wasn't there? You know, as the guy said, you know, akin to the rum court.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think it's mainly an impact in New South Wales, but it just has that sort of ripple effect of trashing the brand.
Joe, you've got your ear to the ground in New South Wales. What do you think? I mean, is it the federal?
Very dirty ear it is too. Look, it is because usually voters are able to differentiate between state and federal issues and leaders, and often they do it very well and they do it very deliberately. We know, for example, Carr's reign in New South Wales was almost completely sort of analogous to Howard's reign federally. So the same people in the middle were very deliberately and very carefully voting Howard in Canberra and for Carr in Sydney. So that doesn't necessarily, and often people, the old folklore used to be that, you know, in fact, a Labor Party could do better in a Liberal state because there was always a protest vote against the incumbent government. So there was that sort of seesaw thing. Having said that, again, you're just looking at a party which has just got a perfect storm of just the most abysmal behaviour combined with the most abysmal luck, and there's been a complete crisis of confidence in it. There's just been a complete collapse of faith in even the most like if you can't trust, like everyone knew, for example, that Sussex Street always cut a few corners in pre-selections, and to be honest, I have a bit of sympathy for that. Like you can't have an absolutely democratic political party. It's just completely unwieldy. You know, sometimes you do have to parachute in candidates or N40 them. You know, sometimes, you know, obviously at times it went far too far, and there was thuggish behaviour, and then it becomes a sort of despotism and nepotism. So you had all that. What was never known or never suspected is the real kind of, you know, Hollywood style, you know, serious gangster style stuff where there seemed to be like the allegations in Cate that we're talking about, like the council assisting was not exaggerating when he compared to the rum court. We are talking brown paper bag kind of stuff. We are talking stuff similar to what we saw in Queensland. Like, it is horrendous, it is appalling, it is disgraceful, and like in Queensland, I don't think a party can really come back and say, oh well, you know, that's not us, or that's just the, you know, that's just a New South Wales branch of us, or whatever, notwithstanding the fact that Eddie appeared to have his tentacles in every aspect of New South Wales, including their federal members.
Well, it's a pity because the O'Farrell government at the moment as well is doing things that are actually pretty unpopular with the electorate, but given what's going on with New South Wales Labor and ICAC, it's just kind of not resonating, I don't think, in terms of shifting voters over at all. Like the O'Farrell government's decision, shooting national park, is so unpopular, yet I read in the papers today apparently that isn't resonating in terms of them talking to people about their votes. The cuts to public education, the cuts to public sector wages. I mean, you know, there's a lot of people on the street. There seems to be a lot of disquiet. Shooting in national parks, again, a huge one. But, you know, meanwhile, Labor's in Ike, so...
Yeah, that's right. I mean, the thing is, you know, Al Capone might get up in front of the cameras and make a lot of really excellent points, but at the end of the day, everyone's going to go, yeah, but you're Al Capone. Yeah. Like, you know, Al Capone can say, why did you cut, you know, $1.7 billion from schools, or, you know, why are you allowing kids to hunt in national parks? You know, but you're Al Capone. It doesn't matter what
but
they
there are
say.
some federal Labor policies that are playing badly in parts of New South Wales.
Yeah, there are. I mean, there's other stuff as well. So
if you go, as I understand it, in the Western Sydney, they really don't like the fact that we've had so many, you know, boat arrivals. That, you know, it's something that seems to be a real issue there. I think, you know, probably the carbon tax went down like a lead balloon in the western parts of Sydney too. So, you know, it's all kind of layers upon layers, really. So.
I think, yeah, certainly. I think that and that's where you have the coalescence of the state and federal politics. Like, people in Western Sydney, I don't think are all just xenophobic rednecks. In fact, plenty of them are not rednecks. Plenty of people who have issues with asylum seekers are immigrants themselves, and blah blah blah. But they're suffering, for example, terrible infrastructure congestion and overcrowding. So they equate a national issue like boat people with a state issue like a lack of transport building and a lack of city building that they blame on the previous Labor government. So they dovetail there sometimes.
Right, and something that's going to affect people in a large number of electorates across Australia potentially. Tony Abbott is keeping his cards close to his chest on whether the coalition will direct preferences to the Greens come September. The opposition leader says those decisions will be made closer to the election date, and it's a matter for the party organisation.
We will determine our preference arrangements closer to the date of the election. It will ultimately be a matter for the party organisation where our preferences go. But I just want to make it crystal clear that in the end, my focus is not on other parties and how many votes they get. My focus is on being a credible alternative government and maximising the vote that the coalition gets.
Cate, how important will the Liberals' preferences be in this election?
We will determine our preferences closer to the election, and our party organisation will be making that decision. But at the end of the day, it's the number of votes we get that counts. I think there's a standard line that every politician rules out when they're asked about preferences. But I think the main thing with the Liberal Party preferences that people are talking about is in the seat of Melbourne. We are actually not relying on Liberal Party preferences in the seat of Melbourne. Adam's been a really good, hard-working member. That's right. And we are campaigning very hard in the electorate. Adam is out there every day when he's not, obviously in federal parliament. Even then, obviously, he's still working for his electorate. But we are hoping to win that seat in our own right this time.
Very unlikely.
Oh, I don't think it's very unlikely.
Because what's going to happen is that, the Liberals
He's got
will come...
the power of incumbency.
Well,
that's a...
But they've got a good candidate. The Labor Party have got a good candidate.
Adam's a better candidate.
Yes, true. How much do you think it will matter
the Liberals
overall?
will come third. They may actually pick up, I think, the Liberals. So if they swing their preferences to Labor, they'll romp it in. And I think that's exactly what will happen, because the scenario this time is really different from last time. Last time, the coalition were really hell-bent on making sure that the number of Labor seats was as low as possible. So if, the Greens got one seat in Melbourne, so this time I think it's a completely different scenario. They'll kind of take moral high ground. We don't like value in the Victorian election. We won't preference the Greens. So I think Bant will be out, and it may also be an issue. It may actually save the bacon of some other inner city parliamentarians. I'm thinking maybe Albanese and Plibersek. They're kind of in areas where this kind of same play out of factors happens.
But what about more broadly, Joe, if we talk about the Greens? They haven't been polling very well. The drift is actually going to the coalition mainly, and some indicating an independent or uncommitted now. So what can they be doing if you were advising them?
Look, it's hard. I think losing...
the Greens.
Yeah, that's right.
Let's go.
There's a hypothetical.
We are open. All ears.
That's right. Every week.
We catch up for coffee every morning. He's my media advisor.
Put a camera in front of me. I think losing Bob Brown was a terrible blow for them. I think that it was obviously, even people who vehemently disagreed with Bob's policies genuinely seemed to like him personally, and he had a great sort of brand of integrity about him. So I think that's going to be very, very hard for them. I think their way of going forward from that, the only way I could possibly have seen it being in any way a benefit for them and capitalising on it, is if they skipped a generation and just targeted the young inner city hipster vote, and that would have involved going to Sarah Hanson-Young and Adam Bant as a team probably. Why they then went to Christine Milne, who, no offence to her personally, but just has absolutely zero charisma. I think someone said that, Morris Yema had all the charisma of a wet cat. I think, Christine Milne is well and truly so. She's
I don't agree about the whole where Greens are at in the polls, actually. All of the polls actually still have us around. It's pretty, we're kind of between 9 up to 11, 12 in some polls.
Last I saw you were at 8.
No, I don't think so.
But it has drift that you haven't experienced a similar drift the coalition has over the past, say, month or two.
No, of course, no, we haven't. But the rhetoric around the Greens are doing badly in the polls, I don't think is playing out.
No,
and in terms of
down.
Christine, I mean, she actually was the absolute first choice in terms of leader for the Greens. She's incredibly experienced. We needed a very good negotiator. She is, I think she's charismatic. I think she's fantastic.
She did a pretty bloody good negotiation with the Gillard government that she then tore up
as well.
I don't understand that, but I think you'd want a leader who was young, who could position the Greens as the young vote, a bit like the Channel 10 of politics.
Joe, I don't know how your application for the advisor to the Greens is going to go, but I just want to move on to another matter now.
At least I've got a beard.
And that is, you do have a beard, that's true. That might stop there. But the business community isn't too pleased with Labor's latest change to immigration law. The government announced over the weekend it would tighten the rules for temporary visas given to overseas workers. The government feared that people were rorting the 457 visas. But employers say the visas have been a useful way of finding skilled workers for jobs that Australians either couldn't or wouldn't do. The Prime Minister has defended the new plan.
Each and every day we'll always put Australian jobs first, and that's what we've done in saying we would further crack down on inappropriate use of 457 visas.
Judith, well, the business community was certainly unanimous in their criticism of this crackdown. What's your view?
Well, I mean, it's completely legitimate criticism. I mean, this is just an example of them, burning the crops, really. So, I mean, this is a deal for their union mates. The unions hate these visas. I guess the labour market has softened quite a bit. So, we've had some issues in Melbourne at one of the waterworks sites. But, I mean, the thing is they've gone about this a really bad way. So, I mean, the vast majority of employers who deal with the Department of Immigration do the right thing. It's quite a legitimate transaction. But, the response of this government has been so often to tie business up in more red tape, more compliance costs. And the relationship between the business community and the Labor government is incredibly sour. And so, yet another example of it deteriorating even further.
What do you think, Cate? It did seem odd that in the last 6 months of last year, the number of people applying for these visas went down by 4.8%, and yet we're doing it now. What do you think that's about?
Well, this is similar to what Adam Bandt was introducing last year to deal with the enterprise migration agreement. So it's very similar, which is he had a protecting local jobs bill, which is all about ensuring that jobs are advertised on a local board, that businesses have to go and try and at least advertise for local jobs first, that looks at training and trying to skill up local people for jobs. So
you believe there is evidence of substantial rorting for this particular visa?
I would not know and be able to comment on that, on whether there is evidence, but I do know that Adam last year identified the enterprise migration agreements as something to deal with in terms of ensuring that we skill up people locally as much as possible, and with the resources boom and mining boom, that we ensure they're actually skilling Australians as well. So that was where he came from. So we're supportive of what the unions are asking for here in terms of rorts. I don't know whether...
Joe, two opposing views here. Where do you stand?
Oh, look, being the moderate centrist voice of reason that I am, I'm going to come in the middle.
You've got a number of hats, yeah.
Certainly, I used to do the workplace round for the telly, and without a doubt, employers were rorting 457 visas, particularly in the construction industry. The construction union up here, like there's psycho-militants interstate in a couple of other states, particularly WA and Vic. But in New South Wales, the CFM union is quite a sort of relatively reasonable union, and they do a lot of good work, and they would go and do raids and stuff. And, it was almost like sort of, pulling back a doormat, and see all these people scuttle. A lot of Korean workers were coming in, blah, 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 blah. Now, it's impossible to make that case as an employer that we're at a construction site in the middle of Sydney and we can't find any local workers. In an environment where it's, 4 to 5% unemployment, we can't find any local workers who are capable of doing the job of an unskilled Korean labourer. Patently, that's ridiculous. By the same token, I think there has been a little bit of grandstanding on the part of the unions, talking about giant, say, oil and gas projects or iron ore projects or whatever that are on the other side of the country and you say and temporary, and that they want to get obviously online as soon as possible, and saying that, well, hang on, you know, you can't get someone to come from overseas you can get right away because there's a bloke in Melbourne who might one day decide that he might go to the thing if you give him 6 months training. So you've got to have a bit of give and take.
Okay. All right, and let's go to our guest tonight, who's an anthropologist and Aboriginal rights advocate who's been an influential voice on developing Indigenous policies. Professor Marcia Langton is Chair of Australian Indigenous Studies at the University of Melbourne. She was also last year's Boyer Lecturer. Professor Langton is giving an address to the Centre for Independent Studies tomorrow night in Sydney, arguing that exceptionalism in education has failed. She says Aboriginal children should learn the same curriculum as other kids. Marcia Langton, welcome to The Drum.
Thanks for having me.
Well, you argue in your speech that educated Australians have failed to understand the needs of Indigenous students. Can you tell us how this is and why this is?
Well, the first need of an Aboriginal child is the same as every other child in society, and that need I'm talking about is to become fully literate and numerate. And people who have a lesser standard for Indigenous children are failing them. I'm very simply talking about providing education to Indigenous children, and the practice, it's not stated in policy explicitly, but it is the practice to not deliver the national curriculum to Aboriginal children, to not ensure that they become fully literate and numerate.
And how have we got to this point of lowering our expectations, as you say?
There's a number of attitudes that young teachers come out to the schools with. Say, for instance, ideas about what's culturally appropriate. This is one of those free-floating concepts. It's a grab bag of all sorts of things. As it was originally designed, it was very, very useful, and it can still be useful, but in the hands of people who don't know what they're talking about, it's become a very convenient bucket that enables them to become confused, perhaps deliberately confused, and to avoid their responsibilities. And so, for instance, I heard a story from a remote school the other day. A young friend of mine had a visitor from down south, and this young academic was disgusted to see an Aboriginal woman reading to a young child a book called Little Brown Bear, and bemoaned how culturally inappropriate it was. Well, as far as I know, there's only one children's book ever to come out of Maningrida, and it's the wrong age group anyway. So what are you going to read the kids? You have to read them all sorts of stuff. So, and why shouldn't little kids in Maningrida know about Little Brown Bear? What's wrong with that? You know, so it becomes very sloppy,
right?
Sloppy practice.
Right, and you seem to be saying that the education of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander students, that we need to be getting back to the basics and concentrating on attendance and good teaching. Or what is the best way to do that?
Well, I think we need to have partnerships between the federal department, the state and territory departments, the schools, in an arrangement so that schools are rewarded for doing the right thing and penalised for not doing the right thing. If schools are not turning out children who can, perform tests, the NAPLAN tests, for instance, and read and write in their age group at an appropriate level, then we need to be asking why, and schools need to be held accountable. And that means that they have to go into partnership with communities. It's no longer acceptable, in my view, for large proportions of Aboriginal communities or the Aboriginal population to say that there's no point in sending kids to school because they won't get a job. What's the point of education? The days are gone when that's an excuse for not sending children to school. I think not sending children to school is child abuse, and I know that there are many NGOs who defend children's rights who agree with me on this matter, or at least I agree with them. And I think we need to be very firm about truancy.
Right. And just in light of that, what's the most important responsibility of the parents then?
to get their kids to school every day and send them along school ready. That is fed, washed, wearing clean clothes and able to sit in school and learn.
Right, I think Judith had a question.
Yes, Judith Sloan here. Is this just an issue for Indigenous children in remote communities, or is this a broader issue? Is this also affect children who live in regional centres and the cities?
It's an issue in the cities as well. In fact, the largest numbers of Aboriginal people are in the cities. Say, for instance, in Sydney and increasingly in Brisbane and Townsville, you have very large Aboriginal populations, and those kids are not doing too well on the NAPLAN tests either. But, you know, these are statistics, of course. I'm not talking about all Aboriginal children or all families. And, you know, lots of kids are doing well, and we're seeing improvements, say, on grade 12 completion. So there's been a 4-point-something% increase on grade 12 completion. We've seen huge increase in the number of children attending kindergarten to the point where the Prime Minister was able to claim in the Close the Gap report that the targets have been met and that we're at parity. I'm not so sure about that because these statistics don't take into account the children who never get enrolled at school.
Marcia, Cate Fairman here. I was reading the other day about ear, particular ear disease, middle ear infection that can affect young Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander kids that actually can last with them, say, 2.3 years or 2.5 years compared to other kids where they get over that infection within 3 months, and the difficulty that they then face in terms of their formative learning years. So there's an element of health in here as well, of course, isn't there, for young Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander kids?
Yeah, and I think, you know, we just need to be commonsensical about it. It's well understood that otitis media and various other health problems are holding children back at school. And a common sense position would be, what would you do if it was your child? Well, you'd want your child to get better, of course, and you'd want your child to have remedial classes for the school that they'd missed out on, so that when they eventually get back to school on a full-time basis, they're not too far behind, and you want them to keep up with their age group. So we need remedial classes for those children and for those children who've missed classes because of simple issues of non-attendance at school.
Professor Langton, thank you so much for joining us on The Drum. It was a very thought-provoking and strong speech, so thank you.
Thank you.
And finally, that celebration of all things Hollywood, the Academy Awards, has been beamed around the world today. As usual, there were upsets and snubs, and of course, the spotlight was on the frocks almost as much as the films. But are the Oscars in danger of becoming obsolete? Fairfax film critic Paul Burns has written an opinion piece today arguing the future of the original award show is under threat from falling ticket sales, ageing Academy voters and a failure to stay relevant to a younger audience. Joe, did you watch the Oscars today?
Oh, you didn't have to, because you already know everything that's going to happen. Like, the leaks is coming. And the thing is, the Academy doesn't know what it's got. Well, the Academy only makes its decisions based on what everyone says the Academy should do. Last time, it's what happened. There was the insider crisis when Rusty, the greatest actor who ever walked the face of the planet, should have got an Oscar for the Insider, right? And the Academy were idiotic and gave it to someone else. I can't remember who. No, I can't remember who.
But this is what the Academy Awards does.
And then that's what the Academy does. Well, so they get it wrong, right? And then
but they also make people argue as well, right?
Well, no, but then they compensate and they thought, oh my God, we meant to Rusty. Oh, we've stuffed it up.
Who's Rusty?
Russell Crowe. Oh my God, what are you people talking about? Oh, for the love of God.
Okay, just quickly.
But then they give it to him for Gladiator when he shouldn't have won it. And everyone goes, what did you do that for? And the Academy goes, well, you said to
and it's littered with the history.
So now they do whatever people
wrong
say.
Decisions. But I think the question is,
it's frock central too now.
Yeah, no, the frocks are fascinating. Everyone wore silver. But is there anything about the fact that 50% of the people who vote for the Oscars are over 50?
Yeah, I think it's becoming incredibly outdated. And look at, for example, the HBO company, you know, that produces such amazing programs like The Wire and Deadwood. I mean, it's the face of this entertainment is completely changing. Young people are kind of looking at that as in, oh, you know, ho hum. The real stars half the time potentially potentially aren't even celebrities. I mean, I think, you know, in the age of YouTube and everything, people can get millions of hits. They don't need to be celebrities. I do think the Oscars are, you know, they're just becoming like your favourite aunt. You know, you kind of want to hold on to them, but there's really exciting stuff happening just around the corner, and they're missing that.
I think I need to say young and fresh and edgy like the Logies.
You just want to host them, don't you?
That's right. Oh, I'm nominated, by the way. You can vote for me at the TV Week website.
And at that point, that is all for The Drum. Thanks so much to our panel, Judith Sloan, Cate Fairman and Joe Hildebrand.
Vote Joe.
You can check out The Drum online at abc.net.au/The Drum. Please join us again the same time tomorrow night. We'll see you then.